So now I would love to kick it over to Terry from Widen. Terry and I have been working really closely together for the last several months, getting them live on RightRev. I can say that it's been a super fun project. I hope Terry says the same thing. And she's gonna give a few words about why they needed RightRev, why they chose RightRev, and sort of how the implementation went. So thanks, Terry, for joining.
Yes, thank you, Jen. And as Jen said, I'm Terry Zychek. I'm with Widen. We are a software service company, so selling digital asset management and recently acquired by Acquia. And I'm director of accounting there. And we went live with Salesforce CPQ and billing in July of 2020. And wanted all of our contracts and billing, including revenue, into like one platform. And so we started looking into the revenue recognition, which is native to Salesforce, and realized that we had some problems with ASC 606, which Jen will get into later, and just the allocations of how revenue is supposed to be recognized. And so Neocol approached us and said they had a new product that was, to be tested, first customer kind of thing, and would be interested. Saw a demo of RightRev and immediately thought this is exactly what we need. We originally had looked at other revenue platforms and really wanted everything to stay within Salesforce because reporting needs, bookings, revenues, everything else was nice to have all in one place. And that was a big deal for us. And so RightRev just allowed us to take that complexity of accounting on the revenue side for software and be able to manage that for us. Prior to that, it was taking me probably a good 2+ weeks just to close the revenue transactions because a lot of manual effort had to go into reconciling that. And with RightRev, we went live with the UK, I think September close, so that would have been October. We're in our third month of closing for the UK. So excited. Everything is right there. I don't have to, all I have to do is reconcile it basically. There's not a lot of manual entries. Everything goes through, all the contract modifications, all of that. So we're anticipating as I get more familiar with RightRev that'll take us from a couple of weeks down to 1 or 2 days tops, which is really important for us, especially as we move into a much larger company and then have our audits and so forth and all the different information on that. So that was the big thing for us, and it's been a wonderful tool.
Thank you, Terry. Do you guys have any questions for Terry?
I do. This is Kevin Hogan. I'm out of the Chicago office. Can you talk a little bit about what you were using previously and the challenges that you were encountering and what spurred you to make the change?
Spurred us to make the change to RightRev. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. What were you using before that was causing you, the 2 to 3 week close time frame?
So we were using Salesforce's kind of their native revenue schedules and revenue transactions within that. And Neocol had actually built for us a revenue allocation, so an MEA, multiple arrangement allocations. So and to be able to get the allocations to work, because Jen will get into all the details of it, but there's a lot of complexity with ASC 606. And specifically, like when a new contract would come through, it was allocating nicely. Everything, based on standalone pricing was working the way we needed it to. But as soon as we had any contract modifications and needed to go back and amend those allocations, that's where I basically would say it broke at that point. And so at that time, it was a manual, pull the information, do Excel spreadsheets, recalculate the allocation, put in revenue adjustments on each and every one of those contracts that went through. And that was a very painful process. That's something that we needed to make sure that just because of the manual side of that, we needed to be able to take that and move that into something that was more automated.
What I did for like the education session that I'm going to show you guys is basically walk through the 5 steps of ASC 606. And I'll show you an example of a spreadsheet similar to what Terry would have had to use to figure out what those reallocations should be every time a contract changed. So you'll understand like truly the pain that Terry went through. Maybe not to the same degree that she went through it, but you'll start to understand it. Anyone else have questions for Terry? Anybody on the phone?
How long did it take you guys to implement?
We started in earnest in April, right, Terry?
Yes.
And then we went live in October with the September data.
Correct.
And I would say timelines should be shorter going forward for future projects. I will also say that part of the reason that it took that much time, and Terry, let me know if you agree, I would say two things. The reconciliation process for data migration. I don't think that people think about data migration from a RevRec perspective and really understand how difficult it is and how arduous the reconciliation process is. And typically it's going to be, the onus is going to be on our customers to do that reconciliation. And you guys just heard Terry say it takes her 2 weeks to close 1 month. Do you think that she has time to do these reconciliations on top of her daily job? No. So the reconciliations take a really long time. It might be one of those things where, we as Neocol take that on as like a separate phase of the project. Like we just know you guys aren't gonna have time for this. Or, in a much larger company, they might have a team who's dedicated to doing those reconciliations. So it might be a little bit different. I think the other piece was with the Acquia acquisition. We didn't actually know about the Acquia acquisition until it happened, until it was public. So in the background, Terry and her team are like scrambling to do all of the paperwork and all of the due diligence that Acquia is asking for as part of the acquisition, on top of their day jobs, on top of an implementation. So I think there were a lot of delays there where Terry and team just said, listen, guys, we absolutely can't work on this right now. We need to time out, we need to pause, we need to put this on hold. And having been in Terry's shoes before, having done that kind of work and been through acquisitions, I was like, what am I gonna say? No, Terry, this is more important. Totally understand. So I think it's something that you need to think about in any project, like how small is the team? How much bandwidth do they have? Do they understand how much work it's going to be on their side? Because it wasn't a small amount of work, right, Terry, on you guys' side. And at Widen, all roads lead to Terry. She does everything. That was
We have a small team. We have a very small team.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's very small. So it was like the perfect storm of things. But yeah.
Yes, and I would say 100% all of what Jen just said. The importance of getting that revenue reconciled properly, so the deferred revenue in the GL is correct. That's driving your business, right? So you can't have your revenue wrong. So that was something that we had to step through. And actually the approach we took was not just to take it all at one piece and look at the whole picture for all those contracts that were out there. We actually stepped through it month by month, so that we knew that, okay, that first month was good. And now let's look at the next set of contracts. And it was contract by contract, but a lot of it we just dumped into Excel, did a lot of different pivot tables, things like that, to ensure that everything tied out with what was in Salesforce revenue schedules back to what was in RightRev, and then finally into the GL. So it's definitely something that you want to be really careful with, and having Jen's expertise on ASC 606 helped tremendously for that as well. So thank you, Jen, for doing that.
It was fun. It's still fun. We're still doing US records.
We're still working on it.
What ERP are you working with, and what challenges did it pose that you had to overcome?
We use Intact. And so we had moved from the contract module within Intact, and brought everything over into Salesforce for the purposes of what I stated before. We wanted everything on one platform. And really the biggest thing is just making sure that integration was coming in correctly into the general ledger. So that was the big thing. I know we worked on a few different pieces of that, just making sure that we didn't have any duplicates coming in, that that the accounts were mapped properly, all of that. So that was the biggest piece, is just making sure that integration was there, because pretty much everything sits within RightRev. That becomes the subledger, and then the GL is just the journal entries that move forward from there.
Going even further back, and I have a specific customer in mind that you're mirroring almost exactly. Going even further back, what did you do before you transitioned to Salesforce CPQ and billing? And how did that affect your ability, to recognize revenue and make this move? And what you're doing now improving that? You covered a little bit of that already, but I'm also interested in what you were doing before.
So we were using Intact contract module. I think we migrated to Intact in May of 2018. Prior to that, believe it or not, we were using spreadsheets, which is definitely not scalable. So we migrated over to Intact ERP, and we're using that contracts module within there. Everything was really integrating back from Salesforce, not the CPQ module, but just setting up the opportunities and the products, and letting those products then integrate into contracts module at that point, and then having those revenue schedules set up within there. I recognize that Intact has an MEA allocation within it. We did not use that. We weren't very familiar with it and wanted everything into one platform. So really, we weren't truly following ASC 606 at that point. We weren't doing those allocations. Materiality wasn't there, and we were a private company at that time. Things have changed, obviously, since we've been acquired as well. But even before that, we recognized that with the move for ASC 606 and everything else, that we needed to get compliant. And what we were using at that time was more difficult to do so, especially with contract modifications. So hence Salesforce, putting everything in. I was having also, just to kind of give a background too on why we moved over to Salesforce, especially CPQ. A lot of it was just the need to understand what is our booking, what is our MRR, monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, all the things that software companies need to understand through there. And I couldn't provide that in the systems we were today, or at that time. And so we knew that moving into one platform would allow us to be able to report on that. It's still somewhat of a manual process, but as we get CPQ up and running, we've been on it now for about a year, that ability to capture that booking information and the revenue matching revenue information from there has really helped management to be able to move forward. And again, it was a big deal, especially with the acquisition.
So then were you a private company and were you acquired by a public company, vice versa, or what? You talk through that a little bit.
We were a private company, acquired by another private company, but with investment, within it. So and a much bigger company as well. So Widen has been around originally since I think 1948 as a printing company and moved into software industry. ASC 606 kind of came on, I think it was 2000, John, keep me honest, 16?
17, it changed
somewhere
right around there, yeah.
Somewhere in there, and we had to implement starting in 2018, right around that time period. So really, we knew either way, as a private company, we still needed to abide by that. And we're just trying to find ways that we can make sure we did that timely and accurately.
And if you think about like a private company, let's take a small private company like Widen. Today, they don't report to investors, they don't report to a public company, they don't report to shareholders really, but they know that they need to be prepared if that situation were to arise. So even if you have a small private company today who isn't in that above scenario, like they know that is, to be business ready, they need to be 606 compliant.
Well, we talked about that in QBR.
Yeah.
Every company out there is either looking to acquire somebody or looking to be acquired.
Yeah.
Every single company,
Yeah.
no matter who it is, they won't tell you, but every company out there is in the acquisition mode.
Yep. And if you're acquiring a company, you need them to be on ASC 606. Otherwise, you're not comparing the same numbers and you have no idea what the health of the business is.
You might talk about it more though. I just wanted to know more specifically, like with what the kind of leads are with the use case of why the mid-contract changes were causing the rev track to break. And that might be what you're getting into, I'm sure, but that's what I'm most curious about.
Yeah, so the contract modifications, and Terry spoke about the MEA allocation customization that Neocol built for them. It was basically a bridge before RightRev existed, and it was, okay, we can get you part of the way there,
but ASC 606 is so complex. Like you can't build a right rev within Salesforce through flows. You just can't. So we
tried.
we tried.
Tried. They
Tried.
did a great job, but you really, yeah.
It was better than nothing, but it still created a lot of manual work around contract modification. So anytime something changed in a contract, Widen has a lot of contract modifications. I mean, any subscription business does, any business does. So that I'll show you the spreadsheet that we really need to use to track prospective and retrospective modifications and why it's so complex.
Okay.
It's painful. You're gonna hate it.
So one question I have is more or less whole stack from CPQ, billing, and right rev, and having, how much time saving, how much, reduction of manual time does that take, just having everything on one platform?
That was huge for us, to have everything on one platform. Otherwise, before, what I was doing, especially on the booking side and even just the revenue side as well, is to have one place that we can pull reports from. So I'm now able to link up, like, okay, so here's the booking that came in, here's the revenue, and then I'll get into the whole allocation piece because that makes all that revenue change, based on standalone pricing and the order price. And being able to report on that, time-wise, literally, I would not be lying if I said, it's probably months worth of time to do things. Because I tried and had to, for the acquisition, to go through and be able to manually pull from 3 different systems, from our Excel spreadsheets, our intact information, our Salesforce information as well. And all that data lived in different places, and had to pull those in through queries into Excel and match those up. And I think we have roughly 700 customers. And so going through all of those contracts and getting all of those matched up, can take like literally months of people just like manually going through and making sure everything's right. To have that in one place where you can report on it and link up those reports and be able to connect that without having to use a tool like Excel, or even to export it out and using that tool, is a tremendous benefit. And I would say it goes from being like weeks and months to literally within click a report, here it is. And as long as the data is clean, you've got your information that you need. That is super valuable.
Can you talk a little bit about the change management at your organization, making this move, even from spreadsheets to CPQ to billing? A lot of customers that we talk to know they have a problem, but don't want to make the move because frankly, they're scared shitless.
Really, we knew we had to. We needed to be compliant with ASC 606. That was not an option. It was something that needed to happen, within just our organization in general and for all organizations. And as we continue to grow, our biggest thing was that, is this scalable? If you're going to, we were a company that is, on a high growth rate. And so lots of customers coming in, lots of changes, everything else coming through there. And if we didn't continue to scale and have these in one spot, that was going to hinder our growth. And so I think that was really the driving factor in that change management, was being able to say, can we get something in place that we're doing it correctly, that our financial statements are accurate, they're done timely, so managers have the information that they need, and basically at that point it can scale. Those are the driving factors and the reason behind all of that change. And then once we've identified that, it was pretty much, we need to move forward with this. That was a path we knew we had to take.
I have one question for you. Describe, what was it like working with Neocol? Why did you choose Neocol? What would you love about them, and what made them stand out as such a great partner for this?
They have been a great partner. So starting out with CPQ and billing, we first started using Neocol at that point in time. Ryan was great in helping and identifying what our needs were, because we kept coming to him and saying, okay, how do we get this? You know, what about revenue and all the different allocations and how that worked? And he would constantly brainstorm through different ideas. That's where the first MEA allocations came out, was you know, just kind of brainstorming, like, wait a second, we can do this for you. We can make this work and we can figure it out. And then he was the first one to come back to us and say, hey, I have another solution, right Rev, that I'd love for you guys to see. And from that perspective, you know, we were sold on it as soon as we saw it, and knew exactly it was what we needed. And then the whole right Rev implementation, Jen has her expertise in ASC 606 and accounting, just in general, revenue. She has been a lifesaver, is how to put it. She's done a lot of the reconciliations, especially as we talked about it, you know, as a team of pretty much one or two of us working through this. And she's done a lot of that reconciliation for us, really hands-on with problem solving things. You know, when it wasn't right the first time, like, hey, wait, we have this unique situation, like we need to group contracts together. How do we do that? And like that problem solving and that working together and the communication was really what drove that. So that was our biggest thing with working with Neocol. Also the Right Rev team, the implementation there has been wonderful. Like seriously, when I can send a Slack message, you know, sorry to say this, at 10, 11 o'clock at night and get a response back, I would not expect it, but it's there. And that's the kind of, that's the relationship, that's the professionalism that comes from that. And it's been wonderful. Thank you, Jen.
Mary, I also have to say, from like a Right Rev product perspective, like of course, especially with a new product, you're going to run into things. You're going to run into a bug here or there, or you're going to run into something that no one else has run into before and didn't need to be solved. The Right Rev team literally would fix these things overnight for us. We'd pause it on the UAT side. Okay, let's push this aside and move on to the next thing that we're testing. And the very next day we tested it and it was right. It was unbelievable. And I've been working in revenue automation for a very long time. It blew me away. And I think that says a lot.
That's definitely a benefit of Widen being kind of our first kind of main customer in our first 5, is being able to get that feedback from people like Turi and then implement it so fast. The way we have a product that's growing, that's out there, but if there are things we can do, we want to do it at ASAPs where we can continue to grow and have kind of a white glove service. Terry's been a great reference for us so far. So.
Yes, and Kranti just today was showing me some new things too within Right Rev, and she's so excited. She's, you know, the one who's been working on our implementation from the Right Rev standpoint, and just, you know, being able to anticipate what our next needs are is amazing.
Yeah.
So it's been really good.
And that's one thing, and Matthew will talk about to people that don't know us very well is, in a few minutes, is while we may be a new name to the space, our expertise and our experience in the space is far from new. So Matthew will talk about that when we go through our pitch.
And to add on that, the person that Terry mentioned, Kranti, she and I have worked together for the last like 5 years. So she also is very well versed in many different revenue automation solutions.